evening. I think we're ready to get started. Nice to see all of you here for Merry Healthy Desserts. This is the one you've been waiting for all year, right? All desserts. That would be my choice, yeah, for Merry Healthy Desserts. So thanks again for coming. You have the recipes on your table as well as the evaluation. And I think the whole theme of tonight's cooking class is portion, portion, portion. Because we're supposed to be healthy balance, right? So portion, portion, portion. So I'm going to let Jacob go ahead with the first recipe for tonight. It will be the Snickerdoodle Hummus.
Alrighty, so I was not here this summer, but I heard that we did a recipe involving a hummus or chickpeas, and you guys were interested in learning about how to incorporate it into like a sweet dish, so some kind of dessert. So we have a Snickerdoodle Hummus. And I really like this recipe because it's super simple, contains only about 5 or 6 ingredients, 7 if you want to add extra salt to it. But it's really easy. Just add everything into a food processor, blend it up nice and smooth, and there you go. So it's a little sweet dessert. You can add it to some kind of graham cracker, dip some fruit into it, or if you wanted to, just eat it with a spoon. So those of you who are following some kind of carb-consistent diet, and counting your carbs, the serving size is 1/4 cup, and it would be about 2 carb choices. And then, of course, if you were to add some kind of graham crackers and stuff, you would have to count that as well. But it's a pretty good choice. It contains protein and fat, which will help slow down the digestion of those carbohydrates, keeping those blood sugars from increasing super quickly. So it's a good choice for diabetics as well. Some facts about chickpeas. They're also known as garbanzo beans, and they originated in Turkey, Syria, and Iran. And they were originally cultivated in about 7,000 BC. And the chickpea plant is about 2 feet tall. It contains like little pinkish red flowers, or red and white flowers, that contain purple and blue veins through them. So really pretty little flowers. And then, of course, similar to other legumes, so the chickpeas are classified in the legume family. They also grow in a pod. So there's usually about 2 chickpeas in one little pod in the plant. And then the plant has hundreds of these little pods all over it. So there's 2 main kinds of chickpeas. You have the desi chickpeas and kabuli. Desi chickpeas, those are something we don't commonly see around here very often, but they're darker, smaller chickpeas that have a rough texture. And then the kabuli chickpeas, they're a little bit larger, lighter in color, kind of like that tan color you're used to seeing, and they have a smooth, more pleasurable texture. So that's something we commonly see in our stores would be the kabuli chickpeas. Chickpeas are actually the second most widely grown legume in the world, second to soybeans, which are the most popular. So in 2016, there were 12.1 million tons of chickpeas produced all over the world, with India being the most popular producer. So here in the United States, we have a couple states that are big producers of chickpeas, and they are Montana, Washington, Idaho, and North Dakota. And so chickpeas are a really inexpensive snack, and you can incorporate them many different ways. You can do different kinds of hummus, whether you want it sweet and savory, spicy, a garlic hummus, or you can roast chickpeas or add them to your salad. So they're just a good source of protein and fat, and you can incorporate it in many ways in your diet. A fun fact about chickpeas is that roasted chickpeas were actually used as coffee, or as a coffee substitute, in the early 1800s in Europe and during World War I. So I thought that was really interesting because, of course, chickpeas don't have any caffeine in them, but they were used as a substitute for coffee, kind of like a tea would be as well. Nutritionally speaking, chickpeas are a good source of plant-based protein. So 1 ounce of chickpeas contain about 3 grams of protein. So to put that in perspective, 1 ounce of meat would be roughly 7 grams of protein. So while they don't have as much protein as meat, they do have a good source in them. They're also fairly low in carbs. 1 ounce contains 8 grams of carbohydrates, so about half of a carbohydrate choice. And they also contain fiber, which, as you know, will help with cholesterol and then regulating your GI function. So they also are a good snack because they help improve satiety through the fiber and the protein. As I mentioned earlier, it'll help slow down digestion, and because of that, it'll help keep you more full as well. Chickpeas are also a good source of iron, phosphorus, and folic acid.
A couple things to keep in mind whenever making hummus. Obviously, most of the time, whenever it's in your food processor and you're making it, it's generally going to be about room temperature. And so if you plan on taking this and putting it in the refrigerator, it is going to get a little bit more firm. Okay, so make sure that as you're making it, you get it to the consistency that you're going to want it, right? This one, I made it just a tad bit looser because I knew it was going to be in the refrigerator for quite a while throughout the rest of the day, and I knew it would firm up just a little bit, and so that way, whenever you guys got it, it would still be a good consistency to be able to eat with the cracker or also with a spoon. So just keep that in mind anytime you're making hummus, whether it's for a savory dish or for a dessert, to try to find that balance of the liquid portion of it. And I believe this recipe called for adding some, was it almond milk? Yeah, almond milk. Adding some almond milk to it, just a splash here and there to kind of thin it down. And of course, you're going to have to scrape the sides of your food processor in the process of doing that to try to keep everything incorporated. If you're doing a large amount, it's a little bit easier when you're doing a small amount. And then as far as flavors go with this, personally, I felt like this probably could have used more cinnamon, but I love cinnamon. But you can add some of those spices and things to it like that. Without interfering with the fats and the calories and the carbohydrates and things like that. So whether you go a chocolate, I tried one not too long ago. It was a black bean chocolate hummus that was actually really good. Black beans are really good with making hummus because they tend to be a little bit drier than some of your other beans. And that's a really important feature of making different types of hummus is having a bean that, when it's cooked, obviously, when they're dried beans, you don't want to try to do that. It'll just tear up your food processor. So, but you can use the black beans or the chickpeas or garbanzo beans. You can do chocolate or an array of different type of seasonings and things like that to get the flavor profile that you're looking for.
So I get to talk about the Pecan Pie Bites. Pecan pie is really one of the things that we do at my house quite a bit, and this is a much healthier version than some of the past ones that I've done. So it is using like an oatmeal crust. So throwing those things into your food processor and then making sure that it gets a really fine, that oatmeal is really ground up really fine with a little bit of flour and a little bit of brown sugar. And then it does call for using unsalted butter. So you want to use cold butter, chop it up into little pieces, and then distribute it in the top of your food processor, and then blend it again with your food processor. And when I did it, it worked really well in my food processor. How about the kitchen earlier today? Worked pretty good?
Yeah, it worked okay. I was doing a much larger batch, and our food processor that we have is a little bit bigger than your traditional home food processor, but not by much. And so I probably should have just done it half and half, but we managed. We made it through.
Yeah, so that's going to be your crust, and so then you'll press that into the small muffin tin, the mini muffin tins. What do you guys want to hold up that? So this is kind of what you would want to put it in. That's why we keep talking about portion, portion, portion. That limits your portion when you do that. So you press that in, and then you bake it for about 15 minutes. And then when it comes out, you kind of need to press that back down a little bit because it does bubble up during that 15 minutes that you're baking it. One thing that I did was toast my pecans for about 10 minutes while that was baking. That was too long. So don't do it that long. Do it about 5 minutes. You want to toast your pecans for this. So that's what I found with mine. So I did like doing the toasted pecans. I just left mine a little too long. So then you mix the filling, which is going to be your eggs, your maple syrup, and then the pecan. I don't really know why it says pecan halves, and then you chop them. So it's just chopped pecans, pretty small, because then you only use about a half of a tablespoon to go in each of those little cups. So there's not very much filling, and then you have that oatmeal crust instead of a good old pastry crust that a lot of times we say with pecan pie. So these are bites, healthier crust, not much filling, and then the filling is sweetened with that maple syrup. So this is a recipe that we pulled out of my diabetic friends, out of one of the Diabetic Living magazines.
Whenever you take them, the crusts out of the oven, like Rhonda was talking about, they're going to kind of puff back up. Whenever you go to push those back down, make sure they're still really, really warm, almost hot whenever you do it. The cooler they get, the harder it's going to be to get them to kind of stay back into that form that you want them to be. It's almost like if you're baking a cake or something, and it's not gonna stay down very well if you wait for it to cool. But if you go in there pretty early and smash it down, it's probably gonna stay down throughout the rest of the baking process. And with the filling and everything, it's really simple. Using the real maple syrup, this probably wouldn't be one that you would want to substitute with the imitation maple syrup. I wouldn't think that it would react and respond the same way that the real maple syrup would to baking. Again, as I've said through 6 years of doing this, I am not a baker by any stretch of the imagination.
We're trying to make him a baker.
I'm not a baker, so.
So I have the 5-ingredient peppermint truffle, and I really like this recipe because it's similar to like an Oreo ball. Have you guys ever had one of those or made them before? Well, if not, they're really easy to make, and you don't even have to bake them. This one's made with 5 ingredients: the chocolate graham crackers, cream cheese, peppermint extract, coconut oil, and dark chocolate chips. So what you want to do is just throw your graham crackers into a food processor and process them until they're really fine. Obviously heat up your cream cheese. It says microwave it for about 30 seconds or until it's about softened, or 15 to 20 seconds. Go ahead and do the low-fat cream cheese because you're going to save yourself a lot of that, the fattening of it. And it also makes the recipe less rich. It is a rich recipe anyways because you have the chocolate and graham crackers and then just the cream cheese on top of that, and they're bite-sized. So you don't really want to overkill it in one bite. So after that, you want to put the cream cheese into the food processor with the graham crackers and then get that into a nice dough. After that, you ball them up and then you pop them into the fridge for about 5 minutes. Take them out of the fridge, and then you want to heat up your dark chocolate chips and coconut oil. And you're using coconut oil because it's usually solid at room temp because you want to store them at room temp. And if you're going to use like a vegetable oil, it's going to make it wet and watery. You don't want that. It's not going to be good for later on down the road. So you heat that up, and then what you can do is take a fork, put the ball on the fork, and dip it into your chocolate mixture, and then put it on your tray with parchment paper, and then let it cool. So it makes about 21 truffles, and they're a great little snack. Really brings in the holiday season with peppermint, dark chocolate. You can even customize it by doing white chocolate, which I love personally. So what I'm going to talk to you guys today about is actually chocolate. Do you guys know what chocolate is made from? The bean, by chance? Anyone? You can shout out the name. Yep, cocoa bean or cacao bean. And The cocoa or cacao bean is from the cacao tree, which is native to the Amazon basin. And you can actually only grow cacao beans 20 degrees north of the equator or 20 degrees south of the equator. So it's a very specific temperature that they need to grow. And however, we get a lot of our, like 70% of the world's crop is from West Africa. So that's where we get majority of our cacao beans. So I've actually went on a study abroad trip to Cozumel, Mexico, and I got to tour a chocolate factory there. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the processing of the cacao bean and how they get that to chocolate. So first they kind of run the cacao beans through a cleaning machine, and that gets rid of all the seeds, or I mean the twigs, the stones, and other random debris that can come in. Next they're put into a machine called a micronizer, which is a large revolving drum, and it really heats up the cocoa beans to loosen up that shell. And then the next thing is called a winnower, and that gets rid of the shell. So it's usually dragged through like a bunch of like a hard sifter, like a very metal sifter, and it kind of scrapes off the shell of the cocoa nibs. So or the cocoa bean, the shell of the cocoa bean. And what's inside that cocoa bean is a nib. Have any of you guys ever tasted a nib before?
I probably wouldn't like it.
And they're very bitter. It doesn't taste anything like chocolate. And actually 50+% of the cocoa nib is actually fat, which is cocoa butter. So next, since it's so bitter, what a lot of factories do is that they roast that nib to kind of evolve the flavor. It really tones down the bitterness. And the more you cook it, the less bitterness is in it. So after that, the nibs are ground and they're heated up. And this makes like a chocolate liqueur, really melts it down because of that fat in the cocoa nib. That's the chocolate liqueur is used in recipes for chocolate. So, dark chocolate is made with this chocolate liqueur, sugar, and the cocoa butter. If you want to make milk chocolate, you add milk powder to that, and a little bit less chocolate liqueur, because that dark chocolate has more chocolate liqueur, which makes it bitter. And then white chocolate, oddly, doesn't have any chocolate liqueur in it. It's only sugar, cocoa butter, and some milk solids. So you don't get any of that chocolate goodness. So the chocolate goodness that I'm talking about are those phytonutrients that's actually in the cocoa nib. And these phytonutrients are called flavonols, flavonoids, and polyphenols. I'm sure you guys might have heard them if you drink red wine, or found in red wine, or other fruits and vegetables that have phytonutrients. And these are really good for your immune system because they act as an antioxidant. Another thing they can do, some research is showing that they can help your blood pressure. So help with a lot of cardiovascular problems, improve your blood flow. Like I said, your immune system as well, and can reduce inflammation because they're acting as an antioxidant. So I hope if you haven't tried dark chocolate that you'd be more inclined to try it because you get more of these phytonutrients in it, and which would help your health overall. I personally prefer dark chocolate over milk chocolate. I think milk chocolate's a little too sweet, but that's my opinion. I can go for like that 70% dark chocolate stuff. And what I like to do is think about some of that goodness that I'm getting from those phytonutrients while I'm eating it as well. So some ways you want to store your chocolate is that you don't want to store it in the refrigerator because that'll cause it to get that white bloom is what it's called on it. And that white stuff on the chocolate, of the surface of the chocolate, is actually the fat separating from that chocolate liqueur and the sugar and things like that. So usually chocolate that's tempered for longer ends up preserving better. So even if you keep chocolate that's tempered for like an hour or two, which would be like a Hershey's bar, it'll start separating sooner. That chocolate, it'll start separating sooner. Ugh. That's chocolate if it's tempered for 24 hours, say. So the longer, the better for tempering like that. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Thanks.
I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of these recipes have had some common themes. And so one of them's been portion size, and another of them has been adding produce, so fruit, vegetable, or in the case of the hummus, a legume, right? Beans. And so this last recipe does all those things. So it's our grand finale, and it also happens to have the most ingredients. But that's because gingerbread is so flavorful, so we've got a lot of spices. All right, so with this recipe, you start with butter, and you want to cut it into 15 pieces. And so what we're going to do with that butter is we're adding it to a muffin tin. So this is another recipe that, by virtue of what you're cooking it in, it gives you that portion size already set out. So it's not one that you have to worry about cutting and slicing later. It's already pre-portioned. And so you take that butter and you add it to the bottom of the tin. And to that, you're going to add pear slices. And I think, are you going to show us in a minute how to do the pears? All right, so I'm not going to steal his thunder, but there's a special step with the pears, and you'll add your pears to that. And then the next step is to create the dough. And the dough is just a standard recipe where you whisk your dry ingredients, and that's where we get, you know, that long list of things: the flour, the ginger, the cinnamon, nutmeg, and salt and cloves. You mix that in one bowl, and then you mix your wet ingredients in another. And this recipe encourages you to just take your time while adding those ingredients in. And so once you've mixed your wet ingredients, your eggs and oil, you just slowly add that into the dry ingredients. Once you've got your ingredients incorporated, you're going to divide the batter into the muffin cups. And you can do that with a 1/4 cup measure. And so I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm portioning out my batter, I get a little sloppy. If you take your 1/4 cup measure, that can really help. And so if you do, you know what I'm talking about, that dry measuring cup, you can use that to help pour your batter. Once you've done that, pop it into the oven, and depending on your oven, should come out with a clean toothpick in about 18 to 22 minutes, and that's where you just take a toothpick and you check for doneness. You push that toothpick into the batter. If it comes out wet or with little flakes, it's not quite done yet, comes out clean, you've got a cooked gingerbread. This is a recipe that you want to let cool a little bit before you take them out. And then you just place them on a wire rack, and I think it would be a recipe that would work fairly well if you made ahead of time and froze. I think it would work out all right. Okay. All right, so a little bit about the nutrition. Like I said, this is a recipe that we've focused on getting a good portion size. It's already pre-portioned, but it's also a recipe that we've done a couple smart substitutions. And one of those substitutions was to take the flour and to make it a whole wheat flour. And that whole wheat flour does a couple of things. It provides you with minerals, provides you with iron and calcium, and it also provides you with a really important nutrient, fiber. And that's something that we could all do a little more of during the holiday season, when oftentimes we're busy eating a lot of sweets and desserts that are usually low in fiber. This is a great way to get that fiber content for the day. And if you look at the bottom of that nutrition information, that fiber that comes from our wheat flour and our fiber that comes from the pear really racks up in that little bitty cake. It's quite a lot of fiber, 3 grams. It's actually considered a good source. And so that's a really great way to get your fiber in while still enjoying a good dessert. Another substitution that we made in this recipe, and it's pretty standard for making gingerbread, but it was using something sweet with a little bit more nutrition. And so does anyone in the room like molasses? Yeah, all right. So molasses, it's got some sweetness to it, but also has a little bit more nutrition than you would find in other sweet things like white table sugar or brown sugar. And so that molasses gives you a little bit of iron and a little bit of calcium. So something that you might not normally find in sweet things like white sugar. So great thing to add into your baking. All right, anyone in the house that likes pears? Okay, all right. So pears are a great fruit to include in the winter season. There's a lot of different varieties out there. This particular recipe calls for an Anjou pear. And this Anjou pear is known for its buttery flavor. It's got a little bit of grit to it. And it's a great fruit to use both fresh and in baking. And so it's really something that is complementary to different ways of use. And so hopefully when you buy ingredients for this recipe, maybe you would buy a couple extra pears and throw those into breakfast and a couple other meals, eat them fresh or whatnot. Pears are a great source of fiber, especially if you leave the skins on. And I don't know if you noticed before you ate your dessert. Whoop, there it is. There's a little bit of fiber. There's a little bit of skin around that. And so you can leave that skin on your pear, and that'll keep a lot of the nutrients, the fiber, and some of those antioxidants that Austin was talking about just a moment ago. Keep some of those antioxidants right around that skin. Let's see, what else? When picking a pear, you want to pick one that's unbruised. Oftentimes in the store, when you go to buy pears, they're a little unripe, and so if they're a little bit hard, that's okay. Just a couple of days on your counter, or maybe 3 to 4 days in the fridge, and they should ripen. If you have pears that are quite ripe at your store, but you want to kind of hold them throughout the week, if you put them in the refrigerator, that'll slow down that ripening process. They'll continue to ripen, but they'll at least slow that down so you can enjoy your pears for a little bit longer. All right, I'm going to go ahead and let Jared show you how to cut up this pear.
All right, so the part of this that can be a little bit tricky is you're going to put your paper in your muffin pan, right? Your butter's in there, your maple syrup is in there, and then you've got to cut your pear in such a way that it fits down inside and seals a barrier between the top and the bottom. So your butter and your maple syrup is down here, and then your pear's in the center, and then your gingerbread battering goes on top of that. And you don't want any, as little as possible, seepage between the two, right? So what I did is I just started up on the shallow neck of the pear, right? Now, of course, I like pears, so I wouldn't have any problem eating any or all of this. And that is just a little bit small. So this next run up is probably going to be my prize. Yes, it is. Perfect. Okay. So then once I found my key, right, then I'm just going to go through and get nice slices of the pear, right? Okay, I'll set that off to the side. And then I've got a couple stacks here. Try to put those on in place. I'm going to put this guy over the top. And then I'm going to gently cut down so that I'm cutting along the outside of my top pear. And you may have there at the first, you may have one or two of them that are very, very close in size that aren't really going to have much cut off of them, and that's fine. The important part is just making sure that they fit nicely inside of your paper.
All those edges are snapped, right?
All those edges are snagged. That's exactly right. I found this to be the most effective way to cut a mass quantity of pears, which I had to do. You know, if you're doing just a few here and there, see, and then you've got these, you can chop those up for the next morning for your oatmeal, and then eat the rest of it as a snack, right?
Yes.
Perfect. I found, like I said, I found that to be the easiest way to get that same consistent size with doing several of them. And then they all should just fit nice and firm in there. Depending on the knife that you're using and your knife skills, you may have to do a little bit of trimming on the outside edges. Just be really careful keeping your knife up and down straight. Don't let it tuck in or tuck out. And then you'll end up with either oblong or really small ones at the end. And your bottom one, like that last one I didn't show to you, but the last one really didn't cut through all the way. So it's always bruised kind of in a way where your knife went through. I just went through and just kind of cut around it, cut it out to where it was done.
Well, we've talked a lot about different ways we can eat well and be well this holiday season. I'm going to give you a couple of others that are really important to think about. And one is you want to include opportunities for activity. And so find ways to move throughout this holiday season, whether it's a walk or parking a little further away from the grocery store or the shopping mall, or while you're cooking in the kitchen, shake a leg, Find different ways you can move, and that's going to help you to feel better this holiday season. Not only does it strengthen your body, but it also actually helps your immune system. So find ways to move. Another thing I'm going to encourage you to do is don't skip meals. Even if you have a big family gathering coming up and you know that someone special is going to make something that you really want to have a good portion of, don't skip the meal prior. Studies show that when you skip meals, you tend to eat more and you tend to feel less satisfied. And so go ahead, plan for a good breakfast, like we just talked about. Take some of this pear, put it on an oatmeal for your breakfast. Choose something yummy to eat. Even if it's a small snack, that's really going to help you to fully enjoy, the meal later instead of being so hangry you can't even think straight, right? And so don't skip your meals. Make time for breakfast and snacks. Don't forget your fruits and vegetables, so choosing pears, even choosing hummus. Choose ways to get in those fruits and vegetables to help keep your digestive system working well. There's nothing, more disagreeable than to have, a digestive system that's a little angry during the holiday season. So get your good fruits and vegetables in, help your GI tract, and help your immune system. And one thing I forgot to share about that anjou pear, does anyone in here like jelly beans? Anybody like Jelly Belly jelly beans? Yeah, those Jelly Belly jelly beans, the anjou pear is the kind of pear they use to make those beans. So that actually has real fruit in it. So just a little bit of a tip.